Braiding Sweetgrass is kind of impossible to categorize. It's part memoir, part poetry, part science writing, part environmental writing, part reflection on Western culture infused with a lot of indigenous lore and wisdom. So, what did I think? Welcome to Books and Big Ideas, what I'm reading, what I'm thinking about, with Joel Wentz. All right, despite the difficulties of categorizing this book, I want to comment on the main idea, the research, the readability, and the reasonableness of it, because it's a book that's gotten a lot of press, a lot of good reviews, and a lot of reaction. And so the main idea here is it's essentially a very extended reflection on the experience of Robin Wall Kimmerer, who is trained as a botanist, but also has indigenous heritage. And so the image of the book is a braid, as on the front, the title Braiding Sweetgrass, and then the thematic imagery of a braid is very fitting because it's almost an attempt to combine and synthesize what's good about Western science as it relates to environmentalism and ecology, what's good and true about indigenous and Native American lore and stories as it relates to those topics, and kind of holding out the possibility of synthesizing them together and calling Western culture to a healthier relationship with the earth and with the land. I don't know if that was a good synthesis or summary or succinct enough. It's hard to succinctly capture what this book's about, but nevertheless, that's kind of what's going on in it. So, okay, the research. Not a lot to say on the research because this is, even though she is an academic, she's a trained botanist, she's taught many years in different university settings, it's not primarily about her research or her academic work per se. And so the research behind the book, she very occasionally will cite, like if she's recounting a legend or a story that comes out of a certain tribe, a certain indigenous tradition or culture, she will cite where in written form that might come from. And then she also obviously pulls on her own personal experience in the university lab and classroom, but none of that is cited, or she doesn't talk about papers or cite research in that sense. It more draws on her personal experience. So nevertheless, if you, like me, haven't done a lot of reading or have a lot of experience with especially the indigenous stories, it's really great that she has those citations that you can chase those down if you want to read more on the source material. But not a ton on the research front to say here. The readability is the thing I want to spend a little more time discussing because that's probably the most compelling or important or notable aspect of this book. It's just very beautifully written. She is a remarkable writer in terms of her skill with words, with imagery, especially when the book leans into memoir elements. It's very powerful. I mean, there were chapters that I found just very stirring and emotional. There's one specific chapter that's an extended reflection on motherhood, as she's talking about kind of trying to clean this pond that's behind a house that she bought for her daughters to be able to swim in. It's really, really beautiful imagery and very striking, particularly if you're a parent. I'm a recent parent. And so some of those things I found just very, very, very compelling. So highly readable in terms of it being stylistic and poetic. Also, another thing I want to note on the readability front is that the book is structurally fascinating in that it's not... each chapter is kind of episodic and self-contained, and so I was pretty surprised by that. I didn't go into this book knowing much about it, and each chapter is a very different reflection on a very different either Native American story or personal memoir from her own life, or specific ecological issue or specific plant, and how this particular plant grows and what we might learn or reflect on from that. And so from pure kind of readability experience angle, it's a really enjoyable book because I found myself being really excited and intrigued to know what the next chapter was going to contain. I would have no idea. I'd turn the page and think, what is this chapter going to be about? I don't know. And so that kind of is a really, really interesting way to keep the reader engaged throughout the entirety of the book. Now, if you're looking for a much more systematized, rigorous scientific writing book about plants and ecology, that's not what this is. So just know that. It's much more poetic memoir than maybe I was even expecting. That being said, if you do like poetry and you do like memoir, then man, you're going to really, really, really love this book. And so final thoughts on this in terms of the reasonableness. So a couple things. I love the overall thematic imagery of the braid, and I love the idea of synthesizing indigenous wisdom and stories with what we learn kind of in the Western science lab when it comes to plants and healing and caring for the land. I love that idea, and so I love that she kind of tried to use that as an overarching idea. I don't think she always, personally, I don't think she always succeeds evenly in that. I think that if anything, the book is not, the book leans much harder into a critique of Western culture, and so it's not like an even braid in that sense, which maybe isn't too much of a surprise. She obviously comes at this from a specific angle and her specific experience, and so it leans pretty hard into some cultural commentary and critique at points, which I found a little shocking in the midst of the other poetic memoir science writing reflections that come throughout the book. So it's not even-handed, and always even-handed in that sense. So that's, I guess you could take that as a mild critique per se. I don't know, it didn't bother me too much, but it is there. One other thing that did bother me a little bit, which is not very strong in the book, but there are a few times, I'm coming at this as a deeply Christian religious person, and a minister, and there are times when she almost dismisses Christianity in a sentence or two, kind of out of nowhere, and I found that tragic and a little frustrating, if I'm honest, because whenever she would do that, I thought, oh man, that's just so, you're critiquing and you're responding to a particular cultural form of Christianity, which I would also reject, but it's not the Christianity that I know and that I wish was a little bit more popular. So nevertheless, that might be personal to me. That might not be something that you wrestle with in this book. And I gotta say, like I just said, the critiques of Christianity that she's leveraging, I would leverage those same critiques, but just at a specific popularized and I would say distorted form of Christianity. So just know those things going into it if you're coming from a similar kind of angle or perspective as I am. That all being said, the things I said earlier still stand. This is a really beautiful book. There are chapters that were so striking that are going to stay with me for a long time. I learned a good bit about plants. I actually wish that the science writing was a little more prevalent because I thought she's a really good science writer, and I wish that was a little bit of a stronger kind of proportion of the book. But I learned a lot from it. I was moved by very specific ways in certain chapters. And overall, I kind of put this book down with a deeper appreciation honestly, of the natural world. The other book I thought of while I was reading this was Richard Powers' The Overstory. I put that book down, and I just had a shifted paradigm in terms of my look at ecology in the world, and the world of plants, and what we can learn about the land and our own kind of alienation from the land as Westerners, especially white Westerners. So that's my response to this book. Braiding Sweetgrass is a very popular book. I know a lot of people love it. A lot of people have read it. And so if it's something that's been on your radar, hopefully this overview helped you kind of wrap your mind around it a little bit. Or if you haven't heard of it, it might be a book that you would really, really love and appreciate. So if that's the case, then I would commend it to you. So thanks again for watching. Hope that you found this helpful and thought-provoking, and I'll see you for my next review video. Thanks.